Okay. So yes, welcome everybody. Keep your mic muted until you're called upon and have your chat bar ready to type in the questions. And today's topic is harvesting and using your bounty. Next slide. So we have a few different facilitators this evening. There's Elizabeth and Leah will be the technical support, and I will be your chat moderator. And our instructors will be Ellen, Malia, and Carol. Next slide. Oh, back to the root cellar. So the root cellar, just in case you asked a question on Tuesday, because I know that it got kind of a little frantic at the end there, and there were a lot of people trying to ask questions and we were running out of time. I was just looking at the chat and it looked like there was a question about using essential oils as pest management. And so I can put that in the root cellar and then we can get you some more information about that. And if anybody else thinks of a question that we didn't get to that you would still like to be answered, put it in the chat and we will get those resources to you. Okay, next slide. So today's topic is harvesting and using your bounty. And it includes gardening for your health, simple recipes from the garden, harvest, storage, and nutrition, preserving from your garden, and then final questions and wrap up at the end. So let's get started. Our first presenter is Ellen.
Hi there. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about gardening for your health. Next slide. So what are some healthy elements of gardening in your experience? If you're experienced or if you're new to gardening, what are some of the health benefits you're hoping to get out of having a garden? If you could please just share a few things in the chat box, that'd be great. Organic produce, that is a great benefit of having a garden. All right, well, vegetables and herbs, yum. Feed your family, that's great. Get outside, stress relief. All right, you guys have named a number of them. Next slide. So this is a little graphic that shows some of the main benefits. Exercise is one element. Not only do you burn calories out in the garden, but it's functional exercise, meaning you're using multiple body parts. It builds strength and hand strength and dexterity, and it's been found to reduce risk of heart attack and stroke. Of course, good body mechanics are always important, so you have to watch and make sure that you're not doing things in a way that you're going to stress your body. But it also, as somebody mentioned, is really good stress relief. So research has shown that just going outside and being out in the outdoors can lower your stress. So, you know, connecting with nature, it kind of helps you be more in the moment. And weeding is actually one of my most meditative activities. It's just lovely. Not to mention, that's aromatherapy. So there are a lot of really wonderful aromas that you get in the garden. You also get a boost in dopamine when you go outdoors, spend time outdoors. So it's really good from an overall mental health perspective as well. So we've learned more in the last few years about the importance of our microbiome. In fact, there's a hypothesis called the hygiene hypothesis that is that the rise in autoimmune diseases and allergies that children have is partly because we're so hygienic now. And, you know, we really evolved to be outdoors and interacting with soil and plants. And that actually exposes us to a lot of good bacteria that helps boost our immunity. The other thing that is a plus being out in your garden is it it really raises your vitamin D, which can also help your immune system. So one other bacteria that's friendly that most people don't know about is called Mycobacterium vaccae. And it's been shown to boost serotonin and have long-lasting anti-inflammatory effects on the brain. So it's really good. Gardening is good for your brain, not just from the exposure to the elements in the soil, but it fosters focus, concentration, creativity. I know I learned a ton almost every year, things I didn't know, even though I've been gardening for a long time. And then, of course, most of you mentioned that you get fruits, vegetables, herbs, and you get to feed your family. And we're going to talk more about that as we go tonight. Next slide. So not only is gardening great for us, it's great for kids. I started gardening as a child with my great-grandparents and my grandparents, and my mom was also a gardener. And I gardened with my kids from the time they were pretty little, and it was super fun. And it's really good for kids. It builds their self-confidence and creativity, really good science education, and it helps them develop analytical abilities, the responsibility and the need to be reliable in the garden. And there's been studies that have shown that it's really good for kids who have issues like ADHD, builds patience, and then the eating habits that kids get. My daughter was a real grazer in the garden. She'd just go out and start picking things and eating them right off the plants. One time she got a hot pepper she wasn't expecting, but you know, that happens. And then, you know, it really does build family ties. And when you work in a garden with other people, there's real teamwork involved, not to mention being out in nature. And I used to work at a school garden, and we had all these kids who said they hated vegetables. And yet we planted a garden, and then when time came, we had a salad party. And most of the kids ate 3 or 4 helpings of this salad. And we had kids who didn't know that carrots grew in the ground. All they'd ever seen were those little round shaved ones from the grocery store. And boy, did they get excited. It was really fun. And I know they talked about Kids Grow in the first night. And so we've seen a lot of excitement with kids. And if you're gardening with your kids, it keeps you all gardening. That was my experience anyway. Next slide. So gardening for better nutrition, most people think about, well, I'll eat more fruits and vegetables if I have a garden, but there's more to it than that. So the USDA found, as they looked at varieties of vegetables from 1950 to 1999, there was a drop in nutrients. And so the commercial breeding kind of selects for yield and harvestability and transport and things that grow fast. And when things grow fast, they don't necessarily have the same nutrient content. And there's been a lot of study on tomatoes, the ones that are kind of uniform and red everywhere, they don't taste as good. So heirloom varieties may have more nutrients than the things that you buy in the store. The other thing is commercial crops generally are picked early, and that's so they ripen on the way to the stores. And not everything continues to ripen. Even though the color may change, it's not really ripening from a nutrient perspective. And then when you pick things commercially, mechanically, and handle it, ship it around, it can get bruised, it can start to spoil. Whereas in your own garden, you can keep crops on the vine until they're ready at the peak, and then handle them gently. And if you think about it, if things are being shipped to the store, it can be anywhere from 3 days, or if they're like something that's coming from far away, it could be as much as months that they're in the pipeline. And then you buy them, and then you bring them home and you store them. And so at the end, you know, it's not really a match for things that you harvest right away. And especially antioxidants and vitamin C degrade pretty quickly. So Green peas have been shown to lose over half of their vitamin C during the first couple days. So it's really different when you're just going out and picking something right out of your garden. And I think you'll find that not only is it more nutritious, the texture and the flavor are just so much different. So you may actually find out that you like things that you thought you didn't like. I know I have. I know most of my family has as well. So next slide. So as we all know, we've been encouraged to eat more fruits and veggies for our health by the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. And just 2.5 cups of vegetables, fruit and vegetables a day can reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease and heart attack. Some fruits and vegetables may protect us against cancer. And we like to talk about eating a rainbow. So if you eat fruits and vegetables that have a lot of different colors, then they typically have also a healthy mix of vitamins and nutrients. And if you look in your book on page 48, there's a little chart there that talks about different fruits and vegetables and some of the health impacts they can have. So now I've got a garden, and now I've gone out and I've harvested some things, and now what do I do? Next slide. So cooking from your garden. As I said, there's just nothing that beats having something fresh out of the garden that you bring in and you prepare and you eat right away. And sometimes you may not be familiar with how to cook it, or maybe you only know one way and you want to have some ideas about other ways. Well, you know, there are resources out there that can help you do that. Sometimes I worry a little bit because, you know, we have all these cooking competition shows like Iron Chef, and people get a little intimidated about cooking. But some of the best meals my favorite meals are easy to cook. And so you can definitely find easy and affordable recipes. Next slide. One place you can find it is right in your Seed to Supper course book. So if you start on page 70, there are a few recipes in there that you can use for preparing your harvest. Next slide. One really great resource is OSU Extension's Food Hero website. This is really good. It has healthy eating tips, it has recipes, and you can actually go in and find recipes either by ingredient or the type of cuisine or even the meal that you want to fix. And they also have cooking tips. So if you don't really know how to cook real well, you can find information there on how to do it. So another resource, next slide. There's a woman named Leanne Brown, and for her graduate work, she developed a cookbook for eating well on a budget. And she was so committed to this idea that she actually makes that available free online as a PDF. You can also get a book, and any book that she sells, she donates one book to a nonprofit that addresses hunger. And there's some really good recipes in that book as well. Okay, next slide. Uh-oh.
Okay.
Sorry, it signed me out.
That's
Okay.
okay. We're on the question and answer.
All right, so I see you now. Okay, so any questions or any comments on gardening for your health?
Oh, I just want to make a comment about the Good and Cheap cookbook. I've been, you know, I've been cooking for my whole life, and I love to cook, and I have lots of cookbooks and I use lots of recipes, but I just love the Good and Cheap cookbook. It has some amazingly good and easy recipes. So I highly recommend checking it out. It's really, really good.
Yeah, really tasty, really tasty. So Carol is pointing out that there are also recipe videos on Food Hero. So some really good resources for you all. Thanks.
Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so Malia's going to tell you about a crop by crop guide to harvest, storage, and nutrition.
Great. I feel kind of privileged because I was able to teach the first class on siting your garden, and now the last class on harvest. So sort of the bookends there. So that's kind of cool. Like Ellen said, there's so many different aspects of gardening that are really healthy. And but I have to say that the best part is the harvesting. It's just so fantastic to get fresh vegetables from your own garden. I want to note that it does take time, and make sure that you do think about the amount of time that it takes to harvest. I used to get really frustrated because I would go into the garden to harvest, and it would take me a long time. And I thought, oh gosh, all I'm doing is picking my vegetables. But yet, it does take a lot of time. There's also techniques that, just like other parts of gardening, there are special techniques for harvesting. There's also some tools that help out with harvesting. So it's not necessarily trivial to harvest. And we'll talk about some of the things that, some of the tricks about harvesting. So all the different vegetables, almost all the different vegetables are harvested just a little bit different, but there are some general harvesting, I don't know, rules, if you will. And they're listed here. So to get the best flavor and the highest nutrition, as Ellen said, some of these vegetables lose their nutrition fairly quickly. So the best way to do to harvest is, harvest it right before you want to eat it, and harvest, only what you need, and that's a good concept for some things, not everything. If you'll see, the last bullet on there is also harvest when it's ready. So it's kind of a balancing act. You want to take just what you need, as long as leaving it in the garden isn't going to risk that fruit gets that fruit or vegetable gets overripe. So you have to kind of get to know each of the different vegetables and how long you can leave them at the point that they're ripe. Getting the vegetables into a cool storage quickly helps. Reducing that temperature stops all of the enzymes from breaking things down. Harvesting in the morning and the evening for lots of reasons. When you're harvesting, it's generally July, August through October, and it's pretty hot, so it's a good idea to do that first thing in the morning and in the evening. Try not to bruise the vegetables. I have a nice little basket. It's not a vegetable basket, it's just a little basket, and it works really well to kind of protect the vegetables as I am harvesting. And then as you are harvesting, keep those that harvested vegetables, keep those out of the sun. Especially if you say are harvesting lettuce and you put it in a plastic bag. If you leave that plastic bag out into the sun, it's gonna wilt very quickly. Next slide. So I talked about some of the different techniques, and this is one that we want to just especially note, and I'll go through some others with specific vegetables, but this is what's called the cut and come again harvest method, and it works really good for greens. A lot of leafy greeny vegetables will actually, if you harvest, if you start harvesting, they'll actually invigorate. So it's actually good for the plant to start harvesting it. And a lot of the leafy greens, this is Swiss chard and arugula. Lettuce is the same way. If you want to talk about other things that use the cut and come again method, all of the folks online, go ahead and just talk about it in the chat room. You can list all the different types of vegetables that use this cut and come again method. But this is a really good one. You don't have to wait until, for some things, you don't have to wait until it's completely done before you can start harvesting, and that's a lot of fun. Next slide. So in your book, I think it's page 107, is a crop by crop guide to harvesting, storing, and nutrition. It goes through 30 different vegetables, the most common vegetables. So obviously they're not all in there, but it's a really good sample of all the different vegetables. So it talks about how to harvest and kind of tricks for the various vegetables, how to use it and store it, and then it has information about nutrition. So we'll go through a couple of those. I've kind of pre-selected 3, maybe 4, and then I'll have you guys come up with some that you're curious about, and we'll talk about that, and I'll bet they're on that list. Next slide. So these are the 30 crops that are in that crop by crop guide, and it's a pretty good list. Most of what I grow is on this list. So if there's something on there that you're particularly interested in, make a note of that, and you could put it in the chat room that you want to talk about that. Next slide. So I'm going to start with basil, and basil is available for quite a long time, July all the way through September, and it will flower pretty quickly, and so you can harvest it each leaf one at a time, or you can clip the center stem off, and that actually encourages additional growth. So in this picture you can see it's the graphic on the side. It says you pinch off the top 3 inches or 4 sets of leaves, and then a really good storage method for that is to put it in water on your sink, like you might do with a flower, and it'll stay for days and days, if not weeks, like that, and then you can just use it as you go along. But basil's one that will grow quite robustly once you start pruning it, and essentially that's what you're doing, is pruning it. Make sure that you do pinch off those flowers. If the flowers go to seed, the plant will diminish pretty quickly. So storage, putting it in a cup of water, putting it in an airtight bag in the fridge, or blending it and putting it and freezing it is a good idea as well. So these are some of the kind of tips that are in that crop by crop guide. We'll go to the next one. So I wanted to highlight beets as well. I think there was a question about when can beets be harvested, and beets are fantastic to overwinter. I think it was Judith was talking about that she just harvested beets just the other day from her garden that she planted in a fall and winter garden. So if you're harvesting them if you're planting them in the spring, and beets would be something that could be planted even now, they're a cold weather plant, those would be harvested in the middle of the summer, but you can keep planting those out into July and August, and then those can be harvested late into the year, November, October. I harvested the last of mine after the COVID situation happened, and had a beet salad, so that was March. When you harvest some of the root vegetables, you'll see, like in this picture, that some of it, they call it the shoulders, kind of pop up again above the ground, so you can see the size of it, and you can distinguish what size vegetable you want to have, particularly for carrots, parsley, or parsnips, and beets. You can just look at it. Do you like big roots, big beets? Do you like small beets? One thing is that in good conditions, beets will continue to grow and grow and grow. And as they grow, they can get bugs in them. So you kind of just pick a couple and see what it looks like. And if you like that size, that's great. Beets are a great one because you have the ability to eat the greens as well. And there's quite a few plants that you have in your garden that you can eat multiple parts of the plant. so beets and beet greens, you can use both. Cilantro goes to seed really fast. If you save the seed, that's coriander. Pumpkins, you use the pumpkin and you use the pumpkin seeds. And there's probably a lot more vegetables like that. One of the things with beets in particular, you don't wash them before you store them. Maybe brush the dirt off of them, but it's best not to wash them. And if you cut the greens off, they'll actually stay a lot longer. And that's true of most of the root vegetables, carrots and parsnips. They'll store best if you cut like the top inch of the greens off of the beet. Okay, next slide. So the next one I want to talk about is cucumbers. And note that as they're harvesting this cucumber, they're using a tool. And I used to just pinch off a lot of my vegetables, but or just pull them off. But you will find that they'll break off, particularly say a zucchini or summer squash. If you pull those off, half the zucchini will stay on the plant. So I find it very useful to use a knife, or in this case, they're using clippers, whatever whatever your preference is. But things like tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, I always use a clipper, zucchini particularly, and all the winter squashes. It's good to use a tool. So a little bit like beets, you know what they look like in the store. Cucumbers grow super fast. So one day they'll be ripe and the next day they'll be overripe. So you do have to really pay attention to your vegetables, and they hide also. So you've got to really be looking through the plant to make sure you have everything. So you want to harvest them when they're a nice size, and you had the seed packet that told you what they should look like. So when they look like that, they're probably ready. And lots and lots of different varieties of cucumbers, so each of those are different, have different readiness times. And again, harvest them early and often because they do grow really fast and they get seedy and they get bitter if they're overripe. And they can just store in the refrigerator in a bag for 10 to 14 days. So that's that's quite a long time. Okay, I think that's the end of the ones that I picked out. And so I thought I would how are we doing on time, Judith?
Oh, we're fine. It's just about 7.
Okay, so maybe 3 or 4 different vegetables. So somebody want to tell me a vegetable and we'll.
There's a question about microgreens and whether you can do cut and come again with them as well.
Absolutely. You don't want to cut them so deep that you're down to the root. But if you cut them and there's still a few little leaves that are underneath the point where you cut, those are fine, and they'll grow back and grow back and grow back.
There's also a question about what are some vegetables that store well after harvest?
That store well after harvest?
Yes.
Well, I think Ellen brought up a super good point, and that is when you buy something from the store, it's probably at least multiple days, if not weeks old. So I find that things store a lot better from my garden than from the store. And things that store really well are cabbage, beets, carrots, onions, potatoes. Under the right conditions, they'll last for a long time. I believe that crop by crop guide will tell you about how long different things will last.
Okay, and then there's a question about cabbage. I'm curious about harvesting cabbage.
Yeah, cabbage. Cabbage is another one that, at least for me, I just look at it, and if it's, you want to make sure that it's firm, so when you grab it, well, there's a great picture. You see the green one there, you can tell that's really firm. As they're growing, they won't be super firm until they're ready. And then once they look like a cabbage, they're ready to go. I would caution you not to wait too long though, because cabbages will tend to split if they are in the garden for too long. And when they split, then dirt and bacteria get into them and they rot pretty fast. And there's nothing smelling worse in your garden than a rotten cabbage.
Okay, and then there's another question. Does harvesting head lettuce also align with cabbage? And I'm not quite sure what Kimberly means there. Maybe does she mean, is it the same in terms of harvesting as cabbage?
I actually haven't really grown head lettuce, so I'm going to say that it's probably pretty similar in that you're just kind of watching it day by day and until you have a fairly firm head. The cut and come again method wouldn't really work for head lettuce. So that is one exception to that method.
Yeah, and also I don't think they last as long as cabbage once they're harvested.
That's true, absolutely. They do not last. I mean, cabbage lasts months. Broccoli also, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, that lasts a really long time too. Elizabeth, do you want to say something?
I can comment on head lettuce. So you have to let head lettuce grow to actually form a head, kind of like a cabbage does. But it is possible to do cut and come again if you just harvest a few leaves of it when it's small, and then it can grow out. So you can harvest it like a non-heading lettuce, but then you won't get a head.
Okay, so you'll use a cut and come method for a little while, and then stop that method and allow it to head out. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Any other vegetables that people want to talk about particularly?
Garlic is one.
Is garlic on that list?
I don't think so.
Garlic's an interesting one. Garlic is.
There it is.
Oh, there it is. Very good. Okay. So garlic has a pretty specific planting time, and you plant the garlic in the fall, and you actually are planting just one of the small cloves of garlic. So each garlic head or cluster will grow from one small clove. So you plant that clove in the fall, and it's one of the ones where you can eat multiple parts of the plant. And one of my favorite things is this curly Q that's up in the top left-hand side. When the garlic grows up, the one that's on the right upper right hand, that's one that's probably 6 months old. The plant's probably 6 months old, but it'll become pretty robust in the spring, and then it shoots up this head, and for whatever reason it takes a little curly Q, like a little pigtail. It's just the funniest thing. And those you can clip off the top of that below the curly Q, and that's called a scape, the garlic scape, and they are delicious in various recipes. And if you go to a restaurant and order garlic scapes, it's quite something. So garlic, to harvest garlic, each one of the leaf sets that come up, each one of those leaves is a wrapper around the garlic clove. So you actually are harvesting it based on, you want to harvest it before all of those wrappers have disintegrated. And I think the rule is that you harvest it when there's still 6 leaves left. And that means you'll have 6 layers of wrapping around your garlic. So the leaves will start, the bottom leaves will start dying off. And then that, as they die off, that layer disintegrates. So you want to catch it just at the right time before those wrappers disintegrate, and while it's nice and plump. So I hope that's helpful.
Another one is ginger, but I don't think that's on the list.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't know anything about ginger. I've never.
Oh, and then another question is, can you cut chives and then they will regrow?
Yes, yes. Actually, chives are a good one to cut so they don't go to seed.
Okay, and when is a good time to begin planting garlic?
October.
Okay, and that's it for the questions.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, you guys. I'll move along and turn it over to Carol.
All right. Thanks, Malia. Thanks, Ellen. All right. So Ellen and Malia have more or less walked us through the nuts and bolts of harvesting and cooking garden produce, but you just might have some extra that you want to preserve for enjoying year round. So this is where Oregon State Extension resources come to our aid again. Similar to how OSU trains master gardeners, the university also shares its food preservation expertise via the Master Food Preserver program. So folks who are interested, they complete a 6-week, 48-hour course learning how to preserve all sorts of foods in all sorts of different ways, from fruits and vegetables to fish and even cheese and yogurt. And then after the course, Master Food Preservers give back to the community in a number of different ways, including manning booths at farmers markets or at county fairs. They also teach hands-on food preservation classes and answer questions that come through on a helpline in the summertime. So I went through the training for Master Food Preserver in 2016, the same year that I completed the Master Gardener training. And once I became involved with Seed to Supper, I had this sense right away that it would be helpful to provide some of that beginning or kind of some introductory information about food preservation to Seed to Supper, since the whole point of Seed to Supper is to help budget food better and grow more of it ourselves. So, and Malia also went through the Master Food Preserver program, and I know that there are a lot of preservers among among master gardeners, so feel free to pipe in if it's necessary. Next slide, please. Oh, we have the wrong slides after all, but that's okay. The #1 mission for Master Food Preservers is to share preservation practices that result in both safe and high quality food products. So while food preservation is fun and it's one of the oldest technologies that we have, it's not without some kind of danger. So at the end of the slides, I'm going to share some resources that including where you can take some classes. But the main principle of food preservation is to eradicate or stop the microorganisms and enzymes that cause the spoiling of foods, that make it go slimy in our refrigerator, but potentially can cause food poisoning. So we always want to think about safety with food preservation. Let's see, next slide. So before I talk about methods of food preservation, there's a number of reasons why people want to preserve foods. And I would suggest that you feel free to add in the chat reasons why you might like to do food preservation or why you might already do that. But probably one thing that I think about is that by being able to preserve foods, I can avoid food waste. So I can eat things that are available now, but if I have extra, I can think of ways to keep them safe and not have to throw them away. Another reason for preserving food would be because you get a lot of control over your food supply. And I think that might be one reason why people are interested in gardening now is because they also notice how simple it is to sort of have things fall apart that we expected would always be there. So you know what you grow in your garden, you know what you do with it when you're done with it, and you know what the nutrition level it is and how long you've had it. So that's a nice thing about preserving foods. I think it also gives preserved foods also give you a chance to try a lot of new flavors and textures. I learned quite a bit in that Master Food Preserver program, and it contributed to me being a lot more creative, I guess, and experimental with food preservation, and made a lot of relishes and chutneys and just different kinds of sauces and things that make ordinary food seem a little bit more fancy, especially during the winter months when there isn't quite as much fresh food available. And then I think last but not least, I think that preserving foods gives you a chance to share a really long tradition. And if you have children or friends and you preserve foods, you can share that with other people and keep that going. So I have a feeling that that might also be what has contributed to a bit of a resurgence in food preservation over the last several years. So if I didn't, I think I'm looking at the other reasons why, and I see, it definitely can make cooking easier later on if you have some preserved foods put away. That's another thing that's nice about sauces or vegetables that are in the freezer, is that you can be halfway done with a meal if you have some of those things that are ready to go. You put in the time early on, but then it saves you time later. It's your homemade convenience foods, basically. Anybody else have any reasons why they like to preserve? Okay, well then, next slide. I guess if you do it more, then you'll have some more of those reasons. So next slide, please. Yeah, so there are a number of, 5 different methods of food preservation. And excuse me, I got distracted. 5 different methods of food preservation, and we don't really have a chance to talk much more about these other than to mention them. So certainly not any food preservation teaching going on here today, but it's helpful to know when we talk about food preservation, what's being referred to. So freezing is probably the type of food preservation that most people do already. So you might put something into the freezer, but if you really want frozen foods to last at a high quality throughout the year, there definitely are some techniques that you can use and learn and use to keep your food lasting longer. And freezing is, again, very simple, but it does take some equipment. The next, another type of food preservation is drying or dehydrating. We could probably put smoking in there as well. So drying is definitely a nice way to keep foods safe over time and keep them in a small place. You don't need jars or lots of shelf space to keep dried foods, but you do need some tools to actually make it happen. Boiling water canning is another method of food preservation that is kind of entry level for a lot of people. This is how you would make jams or jellies, pickles. We can tomatoes using a boiling water canner. And then pickling and fermenting is a method of food preservation where when you're fermenting things, you're actually creating acid from the food itself. And then with pickling, you're adding acid typically to create an environment where microorganisms are unable to grow. And that's where you get a lot of tasty foods, definitely, is by pickling. And lastly, pressure canning is probably one of the slightly more involved type of canning. I think it's involved because it demands a pressure canner and definitely paying attention to the rules, because there's potential for botulism with canning improperly. So if you want a pressure can, it's amazing because you can can tuna and just all sorts of things, but it does take some skill. some knowledge, I guess, probably. All right, I see a few other reasons for food preservation, and I see food tasting better than store-bought, and I would, yeah, definitely. And if you've got a lot of something like pears and apples, you can just do all sorts of things with it and they don't go to waste. And yeah, definitely tastier, better than what you buy in the store. All right, next slide. So all types of food preservations work, but which one you choose might depend upon a number of things. So you might not make pickles if your family doesn't like them, or they'll stay on your shelf for a long time. I've learned that actually the hard way. So now I make small batches of things until I know that they are liked by other people than me, or they become gifts. That's another thing that can happen with things. You know, what you have available is probably going to determine what sort of preservation you do. I think those extra pears that happen or tomatoes that happen is when people get creative and do all sorts of preservation methods just to keep up with things. If you don't have very much space in your freezer, then you're probably less likely to be freezing a lot. But if you have plenty of shelf space, then you'd be a perfect person to start doing some canning. The equipment that you have available is going to determine what sort of preservation you do. For example, if you have a dehydrator, then you're more likely to be able to dry things. If you have a pressure canner, you are more likely to be able to take advantage of that method. And I think the thing I've learned by helping with food preservation classes is that when people gain more confidence about preserving, then they're much more able to jump in and do it. And the classes that will hopefully be available through the Linn-Benton County Extension Service provide an excellent opportunity to go do some preserving, and all the equipment is there, the instruction is there, and you can try things out and find out what they're like. And it definitely reduces the intimidation value factor when you have a chance to preserve like that. Or if you have a friend that you can learn from, that's another way to learn and grow confidence. We get down to these last ones that come to be the pinch in the moment. If you don't have a lot of time, then that might determine what kind of preservation you use. And I use myself as an example where if I have a lot of tomatoes that are coming on right away and I don't have time to perhaps can them, I might put them in the freezer for a period of time, and then I can bring them out later and do something with them. So that factors in, or maybe you have to create some time to do the canning that you want. And lastly, the temperature, that's another one where if it's beastly hot outside, a person might find some creative ways of preserving that don't make you sweat to death inside. I've known people who have set up some canning situations that they can do outside. If they have some power outside and an electric canner, they can do some of that. But the more experience you get, the more creative you can be. But there's things that everybody can do. Next slide. So just like you plan your garden, it makes sense to plan for preserving. And it really does start with your general garden planning. So when you make decisions on the types of vegetables and herbs to grow, you can use that to help you think about what you're going to preserve. If you like pesto and you've heard some ideas here about how you can freeze that and keep it through the year, then you might consider how many basil plants do I need to grow in order to make enough pesto to keep my family through the year. You might think about specific varieties you want to grow. There are a lot of tomato varieties that you'll see when you look in that territorial catalog that you got. And some of them you'll notice are actually particularly good for drying. So if you have a dehydrator, you can even hone in on the type of variety of vegetables that you buy. And again, think about the number of plants you want to grow. And lastly the next step is to gather the tools and the supplies that you need in order to do the canning. And I guess we can go through, I'm seeing now a lot of questions or comments that have come in, or some, I shouldn't say a lot. So let's see, how does the dehydrating process affect nutrition values? it definitely reduces the nutrient content, particularly some vitamins are heat labile. Vitamin C content will go down when foods are dried. The minerals will all stay, the fiber is all still there, but some nutrients will be lost. But all food preservation contributes to some nutrient losses. Getting things out of the garden and having the plan for preserving is going to save as many as possible, but you're always going to lose some. But that being said, you start with a lot, you do things properly, and you lose as little as possible. So you're still going to be better off than what you buy at the store when you preserve at home well, you will be. And actually, just plain eating fruits and vegetables puts you way better off than not eating them, regardless of that. So let's see. You can freeze, if you freeze fruit and have some left in June, you can make jam out of them. Yeah, definitely. That's another, save some time and do it later. What was the name of the lady who wrote the How to Eat on $4 a Day? Do you remember her name, Ellen?
That question's been answered 3 times.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Sorry. Oh yeah, there it is. I need to keep going. Pardon me. Okay, so the next topic is tools, and I made this video to keep me from rambling like I have so far, plus to get a little experience. So don't be expecting much, but if you have questions about any of these tools that are mentioned, be sure to add them into the chat area. Then we'll finish up with resources.
I do just want to verify that everyone can see the video. Is that correct? Raise your hand if you can see the video. Awesome. It's all right, here we go.
Great time to prepare for a successful season of food preservation. I'm going to show you some tools and supplies that are used to create safe and high quality products. Some of them you may already have in your home. Others you may look for on sale at home stores or at thrift stores, or even find a friend that would be willing to share them. First up is a boiling water canner. You've probably seen these before. They are used to can high acid foods and acidified foods. Examples of these would be fruits, jams, jellies, pickles, and relishes. They have a rack in the bottom that helps keep the jar up off of the bottom so that it doesn't break due to boiling water. And they are deep enough to allow a jar to have a couple of inches of space above them to completely cover with water, as well as an inch or so for the boiling water to do its thing without coming over the edges and causing a mess. If you don't have space for a big boiling water canner, or would like to make something that would be a smaller batch, you can make a boiling water canner out of any pot that you might have. So this is a stock pot of sorts. I found a rack to fit in the bottom of it. And this is not tall enough to can quarts or even pints really, but it's perfect for making a batch of jelly or jam or pickle relish. I can put in about 5 jars in here, and there's plenty of room for them. The other kind of canner you might use is a pressure canner. Pressure canners are absolutely necessary for foods that are considered low acid, like vegetables, meats, and fish. So always know which canner you can use before you set out to do your canning. When you do start with a canner like this, know what kind of gauge you have. So this is a dial gauge canner, and each year I need to have this calibrated so that it is accurate. The other kind of gauge is a weighted gauge, and it is something that you don't need to calibrate. The other thing I would do each year is to check the seal to make sure that it's flexible and there's no cracks or breaks in it. Whether you boiling water can or pressure can, you need to have canning jars that are made special for the job. Canning jars are made of tempered glass that's heavy and withstands both high and low temperatures. They also have a rim or an edge on the top that is thick enough to create a surface area for a nice tight seal that we need. The canning lids are 2 parts. The rims can be used over and over again. the lids are one use only. If you remove the lids after you create a product, wash them and dry them, they'll last for a long time. When they start getting rusty or dented is when you should use them for another purpose or throw them away. The flat top with the sealing compound, as I mentioned, is a one use only. And when you get them ready to can, do not boil them on top of the stove. That boiling can actually degrade the sealing compound. Other tools that come in very handy for canning. One of them is a jar funnel. So this fits over the jar. It allows you to get product that's usually hot out of a pot and into a jar without making a mess. You get it there with a ladle. So any kind of ladle works. Move it in, and again, you have a safe and clean area. Having a plastic knife around can help you go around the edges of the jar to make sure all of the air bubbles are out. And then a tool to help measure headspace is also important. You might use a ruler, or this particular canning tool has 1/4 inch gradations. Headspace refers to the amount of space between the top of the lid and the top of your product. And it might be anywhere from 1/4 inch to 1 inch, depending upon what it is that you're canning. Last but not least is this marvelous jar lifter. So this allows you to pick up a jar and move it around. Again, it's probably hot and heavy, so that you can do this safely. If you're going to be freezing, having airtight, rigid walled freezer containers will help keep the oxygen away from your product and reduce the likelihood of freezer burn. This particular plastic product has those rigid, airtight walls, and it has a lid that will snap quite tight. Bags that are made for freezing are made of different plastic than storage bags, so they will keep the air out. Glass can also be used. There are some other kind of supplies that are used in various canning projects that you might like to be aware of. If you want to make jams or jellies, there are a lot of different pectins that are used to thicken the jelly. Take your time when you're at the store, because there are a lot of different pectins and they work in different ways. So if you want to make a low sugar jam or jelly, you would want to make sure that you bought a low sugar pectin. If you wanted a refrigerator jam or jelly, you want to make sure you buy the right pectin for that. So look carefully at labels, because they can often look alike. And then when you go home, be sure to follow the instructions specific to the type of pectin that you purchased. If you're going to be making pickles, you want to have vinegar that is 5% acidity. And you'll find that on the label. It's very prominent on this particular one. The recipes that are written today for safety use 5% vinegar. Use another kind of pickling product would be to use canning and pickling salt. This kind of salt has no additives added to it, which means that it goes into a solution clearly. Some other salts, like kosher salt or even table salt, might result in a cloudy pickling liquid. Last but not least, I'd like to show you an example of an electric dehydrator. This particular version has a thermostat so that I can control the temperature, and it also has racks with different inserts that I might use for different kinds of products. This particular insert would be used for making fruit leather, for example. In the Willamette Valley, with the exception of herbs, you pretty much need to use a heat source in order to dry foods before they get moldy. An oven can be used, but it's very inefficient from the standpoint of electric or gas use. So if you plan to do some serious dehydrating, I would highly recommend looking for or borrowing a dehydrator.
All right. So that was somewhat fast and furious about tools, but that was the point. So There was a question or a comment about the not boiling the lids, and that was something that was definitely new to me when I took the class. But the material for the sealant, I think, just changed in maybe 2012, 2013, something like that. So it hasn't been that long, and people remember boiling lids for so long that we just keep doing things. So who knew that there were instructions in the box that would tell you to do something differently? So you're not the only one if you didn't realize that that they don't need to be boiled. And something that's interesting is that when you shop for canning supplies, you can still find in the stores these little magnets that are intended to pick the lids out of the boiling water. So I personally think it's a little irresponsible for them to be sold, but they still are. So that's just a word to the wise, I guess. I see that serves you right for just listening to your mom. It's just that things change, even food preservation. And the reason I put the information about the vinegar in there is that the older recipes for pickles relied upon a vinegar that used to be a higher acid. So it didn't call for as much vinegar. So if you're using old pickle recipes, you might be, canning at might not be acidifying your pickles as much as they should be. So this is a reason for the food preservation resources, and Elizabeth will include those on the list that you get. But you might look out for Lynn Benton Master Food Preservers that will be at, well, who knows where they'll be this summer. We'll find out, but hopefully they'll be around. And then the food preservation courses, hopefully we'll have. I can't imagine that there won't be a hotline in the summertime where you can always call if you have questions. And there's a really nifty canner, timer, and checklist app that you can put on your phone, and it helps you work you through what to do with your canning. And if you picked that you had corn that you were going to can, it would not even give you the opportunity to find a recipe for boiling water bath canning, because the only way to safely can corn is to pressure cook it. So I think that's kind of interesting, and it has a little timer, so you don't have to remember how long it's doing it. You just push the start, and it will keep the time for you. There's resources from the National Center of Home Food Preservation, and that's really our source of the research base. And while food preservation seems somewhat like an art, and everybody has tips for it online, I would definitely highly recommend that you get a base in the science of it, because it does have implications for safety, clearly has implications related to safety. So the one company that has reliable resources is the Ball Food Preservation Resources, because they also engage in researching. And when it comes to research with food preservation, what they're often testing with canned foods is the internal temperature of the food and how long it takes for that internal temperature to reach sort of a kill zone. So if you're not using those proper times, that's the risk that you're taking, is not getting to proper temperatures and killing microorganisms and such. So I'm looking at the chat things now. So let's see. Oh, Elizabeth says she has a food preserving book from her mom that was considered safe at the time, but has techniques that research has shown to be risky. Yeah, so I think especially there's kind of red letter dates. I think it was something like 1990 maybe, when we finally got the current tomato recipes. So if you have, and I could be wrong on that off of the top of my head, but definitely I would always look at up-to-date resources from the Extension Service. Good one, Malia. Yeah, don't use fresh lemon juice either, because it has an unreliable acidity level to it. So always use bottled lemon juice when it's called for. Yes, thanks. The Instant pots are another one. I could have gone on and on in the video. Instant pots, even though some of them have a canner function on them, they should not be used for canning and neither should pressure cookers. They should not be used for pressure canning. They just are not set up the same way to get those internal temperatures that are necessary. Yeah, here's the one. I have a friend who probably makes the jams or jellies, but doesn't do the hot water bath. She just flips the jars over and they vacuum seal. So that, I remember doing that with my mom when I was a kid, and apparently it's not recommended anymore to do that. So you might get a vacuum, but it doesn't mean that you have gotten all the air out of that and that your product will be safe over time. So I wouldn't do it. So I would highly recommend that you not choose those from your friend, or well, I don't know. It's one of those things that we just always say, use the up-to-date resources. Any other questions or comments?
There's a new one, Carol. Where would I get everything I need to get started on water bath canning?
Yeah, so if you want most home stores, so I'll just list some home stores. So Mart is a great resource for canning supplies. Probably Bed Bath & Beyond, any of those kind of home stores. There's always Amazon, but some things you can just pick up at garage sales. When we can go to these things again, you can find those that have been used. So the funnels are very inexpensive. A ladle, you can use any kind of a ladle. Any kind of plastic knife you could use as a bubbler. It's mostly the canner. And if you have a big a pot at home, you could use that. If you want the big enamel one, they're at, a number of different stores. So if you like to do freezer jam, I see that the freezer jam, you would use the recipe on the pectin package to make freezer jam, and you wouldn't even need much of any supplies. I hope I answered that well enough, Bree, to where to find things. Dehydrators, again, Mart, you can find dehydrators. And if you pay attention, you can find these things on sale. Or if you just start asking around, people may have them that they're not even using, and that we'd be happy to share with you or let you borrow them. Yeah, Winco is a great place for jars and lids. It might even be, and pectins, it might even be the best place on a regular basis to get good supplies at a good price. There's a question about mason jars. If they're really old and they've been used a lot, they might break. So if you really want to do some canning, it's not a bad investment to buy your own jars and get started with them so that you know how much they've been used. Otherwise, you can try some old ones and be careful with them in terms of keeping them warm before you put warm or hot stuff in them, so that there's less likely to have a severe change in temperature. And then there's a recommendation now that's when your canning time is done, to turn the heat off and let it wait for 5 minutes before you even try to take things out of the canner. That can help a little bit with some temperature issues. But otherwise, if you do have a jar break in the canner, you want to be super careful and wash the jars off that are still in there. They're still good, but you just want to be careful if that happens. Hope that was a good enough answer to that, probably too much. So Mart coupon books often have discounts for canning jars and gear. It's great. So that's I think why we talk about planning now, is so you can think about what you want to do and then keep an eye out for those kinds of things. One thing that I cut out of my video to keep it from being too long is that when you do get some jars, even your own, if you've used them before, is to carefully go around the rim of the jar to make sure that there's no cracks or nicks in it, because you wouldn't want to use those, definitely. Oh yeah, Facebook groups that share things, that's another one. Yeah, people who get tired of doing it. Yeah, lots of places to come upon those things. Just start asking now and you shall receive most likely. All right. Well, canning is definitely fun, and it is a great way to extend the bounty of your garden, and also to take advantage of the farmers in our community that make so much, or neighbors that have extra zucchini, or whatever. So I would highly recommend that you pick up the practice and learn how to do that. And otherwise, if there's no real questions, I'm done. Yeah, very satisfying. I didn't bank on the lighting change tonight.
Okay, I think we've already covered the questions. So it's time to say thank you to all of you. And thank you so much for participating in our first ever Zoom Seed to Supper. And Elizabeth has some things to talk to you about at the very end.
Yeah, I'd really like to say thank you to all the great Master Gardener volunteers that were part of this, everyone who's here tonight and who's been here earlier in the class. I'd also like to thank Leah Gorman, even though she wasn't able to join us tonight, for her work in just organizing this class and making it go on a pretty short schedule. I think we started putting this together less than 6 weeks ago, so it's pretty amazing to have everyone here. I'd also like to thank our partners, Oregon State University Extension Service, Oregon Food Bank, that worked with Master Gardeners and Extension to create the Seed to Supper program originally. I'd like to thank our partner, Benton County Master Gardener Association, that's the nonprofit partner of Extension. And then of course, Lynn Benton Food Share, who supplies food to families in need locally. So, so much gratitude and appreciation to just people giving of themselves to help everybody become more self-sufficient with their gardening. And then a few more resources to share. So these classes have been recorded, and if you missed a class or if you want to share with a friend, coming up on the early side of next week, we hope to get these posted online on our YouTube channel for Benton County Master Gardener Association. And we'll share next week a message with links to those videos. We'll also share a final version of our class resource list that has all of the good resources and further reading and things to study that we've talked about. And one more thing, we'd like to know how we did with this, and also if Seed to Supper at home is something that we should be offering again. So I'm going to post in the chat a link to a survey that we'd really like to invite you to reach out and share your opinion about this class and other offerings that you'd like to see from us in future. And that survey link will also be in your email that you'll be receiving next week. Did I miss anything? Other instructors, is there anything else I should add?
Well, I just wanted to add that we often, every year we've been doing workshops during the summer months in May, June, July, August, and September for the Seed to Supper students on various topics like winter gardening, tomato giveaway, fruits, how to grow fruits, and we're not even sure if we can do any of them this year, but we will keep you informed and we'll send you information via email if we are able to hold any of these workshops. So if we do, I certainly hope that you can attend. They're all free and they're lots of fun. And Bree just raised her hand.
Oh, yes.
Bree, you can unmute yourself.
Can somebody hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey.
Okay. I would just like to mention a couple other things, resources. One is the that garden guide that you got from the sustainability, it does, that we should be having some, well, we don't know yet, but in August, our plan was to have a few classes in community gardens. So those may be coming up, and so you can check on the sustainability website for that. And also, I believe that we just started to get into some talks about doing some of the library series with the librarian master gardeners, which we did on vegetable gardening this year. So I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but maybe stay tuned for that. Or maybe Elizabeth, if you have the emails, you can send that out to them as we know what's happening.
That just reminded me of one more thing to add. So I know that there are some folks with kiddos at home or grandkids in your life that are with us today, and Master Gardeners showed you a little bit about our Kids Grow program early on in this series. And so one thing that we were asking in the survey is if you do have kids at home that are like grade school aged or younger, is Kids Grow a garden experience for families? Would you be interested in doing Kids Grow at home? So think about that, check in with your little ones and let us know in the survey. And then I guess I'll also add that Master Gardeners are here to provide garden support to the community. So our interaction with you doesn't end with this class. You can reach out to us through our website. You can search for OSU Extension Master Gardener Benton County and get in touch with us. We'll also have links in our email coming out that let you know where you can reach us with your garden questions. All right, well, any further thoughts to share? Any further questions in the closing moments of our class? I just wanted to say once again, a big thank you. Gardening can seem intimidating if you're just starting it for the first time, or maybe you've done it before, but it's been a little while. And I would just encourage you to get out there and get your hands dirty. And you do have support through your Seed to Supper book, through the Master Gardener volunteers that were here teaching during the last couple of weeks, reaching out to us, finding us on social media. We're on Facebook as well. So keep in touch virtually, and yeah, go forth and enjoy your gardening.